Hello, and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. On today's episode, we're talking about Randal Woodfield, who is also known as the I-5 killer or the I-5 Bandit, and he's thought to have murdered upwards of 44 people. The I-5 is the Interstate 5 highway and is a major highway on the west coast of the United States. It goes all the way to the Canadian border to the Mexico border. This case did get international attention because not only was Randal Woodfield a serial killer, he was also drafted into the NFL to play football for the Green Bay Packers in 1974 as a wide receiver. Thankfully, he was cut from the team during training due to his questionable character. Let's just get right in. Randal Woodfield was born on December 26, 1950 in Salem, Oregon to Jack and Donna Jean Woodfield. He was the youngest of 3 kids, having 2 older sisters, growing up in a middle-class home. His mother was a stay-at-home mom, and his father was an executive at Pacific Northwest Bell, which was a phone company. Randal was said to be a good kid and the perfect baby. He was super quiet, didn't fuss, didn't cry out, and he was also a really quick learner. He rolled over earlier than other babies, he crawled earlier, and walked at an early age as well. His parents always knew that he was special and would one day be an athlete. His sisters were also great kids and very intelligent, one becoming an attorney and the other a doctor. But Randal didn't always get along with his sisters, often thinking that they were favored. And from what I've read, this sounds like a pretty normal sibling relationship, but to Randal, it wasn't. He thought they picked on him, they got to do whatever they wanted, and he started to really resent them. With that said, he was really close to his mother, more so with her than his father, but his father wasn't really home a lot as he had a lot of work to do. I've also read that with Randal's dad being gone a lot, Randal always tried to be the alpha male in the home, but having 2 older sisters that treated him like a little kid really frustrated him. And this became even worse when he hit puberty. Some would think that this power struggle with his sisters is what set off his problems. His first known problem would be in junior high when he started to expose himself. He often spent hours flashing women, running away, and doing it again to the next female he saw. He didn't think he was hurting anyone. He thought it was funny. And he also didn't get in trouble. Officers basically ignored it because he was so young and dumb. So nobody was really trying to stop him. And he loved the reaction he got from these women. Other than exposing himself, Randal was a pretty normal kid. Didn't get into a lot of trouble, he got good grades, really excelled in math, and was constantly praised by his teachers. He wasn't known as a dumb jock at all. He was quite smart when he was younger. Randal was also popular in school, and by most accounts, good looking. He was 6'2" and almost 170 pounds and was a football star. And football meant a lot to him, and he wanted to one day play in the NFL. His parents supported his decision, but his dreams were almost shattered in high school when he began to expose himself in public again. One time he exposed himself to a group of teenage girls and was finally arrested. But his football coaches helped hide the arrest from his team and the community because they wanted him to succeed in football. And this isn't unheard of. I think it's common practice to minimize or hide wrongdoings of people, mostly men, in sports. Even at a professional level, which I don't agree with, but it happens. Randal's parents didn't even know the extent of his behavior. After the arrest, they insisted that he go to therapy, and they thought he'd be fine after that and his little shows would stop. After high school graduation, Randal would get a job at his father's employer, Pacific Northwest Bell, in Newport. He would drive trucks and also clean and repair telephone booths. There's some speculation that this could be when he started abusing women, because he was on the road a lot. But with that said, there's no solid evidence that can prove that. When summer ended in 1969, Randal would attend Treasure Valley Community College in Oregon after his criminal record was expunged. Here he would play football, which he loved, but Randal didn't really like Treasure Valley. He wanted to be a football star, and going to a small college wasn't working for him. Recruits rarely attended games, so he became frustrated, and his grades started to suffer as well. He was now a C+ average student. Randal would date in college as well, and one of his first girlfriends was Sharon McNeil. This relationship only lasted a few months and Sharon broke up with him. Randall was crushed. He did not take it very well and allegedly broke into her apartment through the bathroom window and trashed it. His ex-girlfriend knew it was him because the only thing missing from her apartment was a small stuffed animal that Randall had given her as a gift. Randall was arrested but found not guilty due to lack of evidence. Randall would later say that he didn't intentionally vandalize her apartment. He just wanted something back, and the only way to get in was to break in because Sharon had stopped talking to him. After this run-in with police, he transferred to Mount Hood Community College for a fresh start. But he couldn't get over his ex-girlfriend. He would continue to write Sharon letters, phone her regularly until she was forced to change her phone number, and even 10 years after the breakup, he sent her a naked photo of himself. He was just obsessed. Randall would then apply to Portland State University in 1971 and would attend the school from 1971 to 1973. He played as a wide receiver for the Portland State Vikings and again was well liked. His coaches remember him as the nicest, most gentlemanly kid on the team. He was very hardworking and very coachable. His teammates said that he was soft-spoken and came across as shy. And he does have a soft voice. It's not a deep masculine voice, it's higher pitched. And his voice is something that his future victims specifically remembered later on. While at Portland State, Randall would also join a Christian group called Campus Crusade for Christ, and he took his faith very seriously. One of his good friends would say that Randall even started to quote the Bible and only wanted to date Christian girls. He also started taking football a lot more seriously, but he was still secretly flashing women in his spare time. In 1972, Randall would be arrested again for public indecency. He received a suspended sentence and was not given probation. Even though Randall had this habitual problem of not keeping himself in his pants, he was also able to maintain a clean image and continued the crusade for Christ. He even once called himself a born-again Christian. But then in 1973, he was arrested again for indecent exposure, resisting an officer, and attempting to elude arrest. This time he was given 5 months and 25 days in jail and 1 year's probation. He never did end up spending any time in jail, and the resisting an officer charge was also dropped. So again, Randall wasn't punished for his actions and continued to live his life and play football. Not long after, Randall would be selected as a wide receiver in the 1974 NFL Draft by the Green Bay Packers. He would drop out of college just shy of graduating so he could fly across the country and attend training. Randall's contract stated that he needed to stay out of trouble. No drinking, no gambling, wear a coat and necktie in hotels, public eateries, and he wasn't allowed to endorse any products unless approved by the Packers. During training in Scottsdale, Arizona, some accounts say that Randall behaved. He tried his best, but he would be cut from the final roster. The NFL would then send Randall to Wisconsin to play semi-pro for the Manitowoc Chiefs, and he also worked for the Oshkosh Truck Company. Randall believed if he worked really hard on the Chiefs that he might be able to work his way up. But while in Wisconsin, there was at least another dozen flashing incidents, so the NFL cut him completely and sent him home to Oregon. Now, I don't know if his dreams being crushed sped up Randall's urge to commit more crimes, but by 1975, he was now starting to not only expose himself, but he would also rob women at knife point. Police weren't aware that it was Randall at first, and just had several reports of women saying that a man would hold a knife to their throats. Oftentimes, he would force the women to perform sexual acts on him first before running away with their purses. This man was described as big and dark-haired, and some even said that he was good-looking. The police would eventually set up a sting operation to catch this robber. A female officer dressed in civilian clothing would walk through Dunaway Park in the woods as a decoy. Sure enough, Randall would rob the officer and was arrested with marked money that he stole out of her purse. Randall did confess and said that he was very sorry and that he had sexual problems possibly due to steroids while playing football. He was given 10 years in prison, but he was released on parole after only serving 4 years. While incarcerated, Randall was given an IQ test and scored around 100. Randall had done well academically in high school, so I'm not sure why his IQ test was so low. Perhaps it was all the football, which could have resulted in head injuries. Psychologists also thought that he seemed detached from his crimes, and they were curious to learn that up until this point, he never actually touched his victims. He used a knife and demanded that they touch him. They also thought he had an underlying psychotic thought process, and his obsession with religion might also be a red flag. They advised that Randall not be released early on parole. Another thing guards noted was that he had a problem with female guards, or any female in charge. He would say he thought it was ironic that he was in jail for being an exhibitionist, but female guards could freely watch him shower or use the toilet. He was also labeled as an antagonist due to his refusal to listen to the female guards. If you're asking why he only served 4 years of his sentence, especially since psychologists thought that he was a dangerous person, it's because he realized that you can get what you want in jail by playing nice. He started to tell his psychologist that he had accepted his guilt and acknowledged that he needed help. He also maintained a relationship with his family, and they would be his support system if he was released. He promised to seek psychiatric help upon his release, and he also lined up a job for himself in Portland. His attitude improved, and it seemed like he really wanted to get his life back together. So he was paroled in July of 1979. When Randall was released, he returned to Portland, Oregon, and he got a job at Tektronix. He also started dating a lot, always being seen out with different women. It's said that his little black book of numbers had over 255 entries. He would eventually quit his job at Tektronix and got bartending jobs instead. Working at bars allowed him to meet more women, and he started sleeping around even more. He eventually contracted herpes, which was passed on to many other women and many of his victims. He was let go from one of his last bartending jobs at the Fawcett Tavern. But then he came back a few weeks later and stole $3,000. This theft ruined his reputation in the industry, and it was very hard for him to gain decent employment after that. He would get a job working at 7-Eleven briefly, and at one point, a pizza place as well. Around October 11th, 1980, Randall had been in Tacoma, Washington visiting Tom Rossi, a former roommate of Randall's from when he lived in Portland. Tim was dating a woman named Darcey Fix while in Portland, but when he moved to Tacoma for school, Darcey met someone else and they broke up. For Tim, the breakup wasn't terrible and they actually remained friends. But for some reason, when Randall found out, it made him furious. A month later, on Thanksgiving Day, November 27th, 1980, Darcey and her new boyfriend, Doug, were found dead in Darcey's apartment. This was shocking to everyone, including Tim. Tim had just spoken with Darcey 2 days prior, and things seemed great with her. Police revealed that Darcey and Doug had been shot execution style in cold blood. Missing from Darcey's apartment was a revolver-style handgun, silver with white handles that used .32 caliber bullets. Her father had given this gun to her for protection, and that gun was all of a sudden missing after Darcey and Doug were killed. Darcey and Doug had no known enemies, and there was very little evidence, so Randall wouldn't be linked to this crime until years and years later. A friend did come forward later as well, remembering that when he called Randall to tell him about the news of their mutual friend being murdered, Randall seemed uninterested and emotionless upon hearing that Darcey had been killed. Another classmate of Randall's had also been murdered and found just 1 month prior to Darcey's death. Cherie Ayers was raped and murdered inside her apartment in downtown Portland in the fall of 1980. Her fiancé would find her body 2 days later on October 11th. She had been beaten and repeatedly stabbed in the neck. Cherie and Randall had been classmates since about grade 2, and she even corresponded with Randall quite a bit when he was incarcerated. It said they also saw each other several times since Randall was paroled as well. Police would question Randall, but he was always very evasive in his whereabouts and really uncooperative. Randall wasn't formally charged with Cherie's murder, but her family always suspected Randall. Now, Randall didn't like these rumors that he was responsible responsible for these crimes, and he wanted to leave Portland, but he couldn't move because he didn't have a steady job. So to get money, he hooked up with an old prison buddy named Tony Neary, and together they would commit armed robberies. It would be Tony that gave Randall this helpful tip of putting tape or band-aids across his nose to disguise his identity. Randall would also glue a fake beard on his face to further disguise who he was. This beard was always attached haphazardly and just looked really terrible. Now, I don't know if it was intentional, but it would be something all his victims noticed. So wearing his fake beard, Randall would rob a gas station at gunpoint in Vancouver, Washington on December 9th, 1980. Then 4 days later, an ice cream parlor. Then on December 14th, he robbed a restaurant in Albany. On December 21st, Randall accosted a waitress in Seattle, locking her in the washroom and asking her to perform sexual acts on him. In January of 1981, he returned to the gas station that he held up in December, this time making the clerk expose herself to him, and then he emptied the cash register. On January 11th, he robbed a market in Eugene, Oregon, and then the next day he shot a grocery clerk in Sutherland, Oregon. On January 14th, it was reported that a man with the same description would invade the home of two young girls who were home alone in Corvallis, Oregon. They were only 8 and 10 years old and were only alone for about 45 minutes. So Randall must have been watching, because when these girls were settled watching TV, he would knock on the door. Randall told the girls that his car broke down and that he needed to use their phone. Unfortunately, they let him in, and he did make a call, or at least pretend to, talking to someone named Jim about his car. He then asked the girls where their mother was. The older girl told Randall that she would be home in about 30 minutes and he needed to wait outside. Randall would then pull out a gun, make them go into the bathroom where he would have them perform oral sex on him. They were extremely scared and horrified that they had to do this, but he had a gun. Once he finished, he told them to stay in the bathroom and he left. When the girls' mom arrived home, the front door was open and the girls were terrified to come out of the bathroom, saying that a burglar was in the house wearing a funny beard. Then on January 18th, 1981, police would get a call from a female screaming, "We've been shot, we need help." This would be Beth Wilmot, who made a frantic call after being shot in the head by Randall. Beth and her good friend Cherie Hall had been working at the Transamerica building doing janitorial work. This building was new construction and a lot of the tenants hadn't fully occupied the retail locations yet, so it was a really easy clean for the girls, since it was such a new building. When they were done, Cherie and Beth had gone outside, loaded some of the cleaning supplies, and brought their purses out to the truck. Cherie started her Ford Bronco, and Beth noticed some smudges on the front door, so they went back inside to finish up, leaving the truck running. Beth had run to the back of the building, and Cherie started to wipe down the windows. Randall must have been watching the girls from his truck, and when he noticed the girls go back, one running to the back out of sight and the other unlocking the front door, he made his move. He would take Cherie first, threatening her with a long gun, and bring her back inside the building. Beth had intercepted them, not knowing he was there, so he pointed the gun at her as well and led them in a room in the back, instructing them to take off their clothes. He promised not to hurt them if they did exactly what he said. Unfortunately, after doing all the things he asked, which was horrible, he shot them both in the head. Beth pretended to be dead, but Cherie was moaning in pain, so he shot Cherie again before leaving. Sadly, Cherie would succumb to her injuries. But Beth survived being shot, and doctors actually found a .32 caliber slug stuck in her blood-soaked matted hair, which had not penetrated her skull. After an x-ray, doctors would see a second slug that did penetrate her scalp but not enter her skull. Police believe that these bullets had something wrong with them, or were perhaps loaded in the wrong type of gun. Doctors have also said that some people just have stronger skulls, so maybe that, paired with faulty bullets, saved Beth's life. Other than the bullets, police were also able to collect semen samples and one pubic hair that didn't match Beth or Cherie. Sadly, a few weeks after the incident, Beth discovered that she had contracted herpes from her attacker. Beth was also able to remember the man who attacked them. He had dark brown hair, a band-aid across his nose. He was Caucasian, around 27, about 5'9" or a little over average height of a man. He also had a unique voice, a very soft-spoken voice for someone who was so scary and demanding. On January 19th, the man with dark curly hair, fake beard, and ski gloves this time robbed the Vancouver Skating Club. Randall would point a small silver gun, demanding the cash from a 17-year-old cashier, and left warning the cashier not to watch where he was going. On January 26th, he robbed Dairy Mart in Eugene, Oregon, with band-aids over his nose. Now police had coined him the I-5 Bandit. Even though these crimes were happening in different states and different towns, they were all not far from the I-5. On January 29th, a 20-year-old working at Witchell's Donut Shop in Grand Pass, Oregon, was also assaulted by a man with the same description. He fondled a teenage customer in the donut shop before leaving with $70 from the cash register. Meanwhile, investigators would get confirmation that bullets from Beth and Sheri had matched those of Donna Eckert and Janelle Jarvis. Several more assaults would take place in February. He robbed a clerk in a fabric store and assaulted the employee of one customer, binding them with tape. He assaulted 2 women in a laundromat in Albin. January 29th, he committed more robberies in Eugene, Melford, and Grand Pass, assaulting females along the way. On February 3rd, 1981, Donna Eckert and her 14-year-old daughter were found deceased laying together in a bed at home in Mountain Gate, California. They had been alive at 6 p.m. when Kristen, Donna's daughter, talked to her mother on the phone to tell her that she was going to a friend's house and she'd be home by 9. When Kristen came home on time at 9 o'clock, she would find her mom and her sister deceased. They were both shot several times in the head. Donna was bound with surgical tape. Her sister had also been completely naked and covered in blood. Donna's husband would later say that his .38 Special Smith & Wesson had also been stolen from the home. Also on the same day, February 3rd in Reading, at a Burger Express, a man with dark hair walked in to find Leah Morris, 18, at the front counter. Marie Sloan, 46, was in the kitchen. Leah would start to speak to take this man's order, and she noticed a silver gun pointed at her. He then led Leah and Maria into the bathroom where he would ask Maria to kneel down onto the toilet. He then taped her hands behind her back and taped her ankles together and her mouth shut. He would turn to Leah and ask her to take off her clothes. He then did terrible things to Leah before Maria's husband entered the restaurant. Randall would force Maria's husband into the bathroom as well and then ran away. 24 hours later in Eureka, California, Jess Clovis, 21 years old, was getting into her car after buying cigarettes at a convenience store when a man suddenly opened her driver's side door. He told her to move over and that he had a gun. She noticed that the gun was a revolver with white handles, much like the one missing from Darcey's home. Jessie would be forced to answer all sorts of questions about her sex life while he drove the car down the highway. He then forced her down into his lap, demanding that she does whatever he says. He gave her strict directions on what he wanted her to do and asked her if she did those exact things to her boyfriend. He would also further assault her, and she thought for sure she was going to die that night. Instead, he taped her wrists together, drove her car to a gas station, and told her not to go to the police, and he fled. It would take her about 20 minutes to get out of the restraints, but she got dressed, went home, and called the police. Her attacker would be described as a 6-foot-tall, 175-pound man with a beard and mustache, tape or band-aid on his nose. The following day, a similar crime was reported in Ashland, Oregon. 5 days later, the I-5 Bandit held up a fabric store, molesting the store clerk as well as a customer, then again in Vancouver, Olympia, and Bellevue, Washington, all with sexual attacks. Around this time, Randall would also move into the home of Arden Bates after she posted an ad for a roommate. Arden had a 6-year-old son and wasn't really Randall's type, so they actually managed to get along and live together without any issues. She thought he was a nice, laid-back guy. Randall always paid his rent on time, although she never knew where he got his money, and he seemed to be unemployed. Despite not working, he also seemed to live like a man who had a great job, often coming home with expensive steaks and cases of beer. He once bought her an expensive houseplant for the living room, and he made a lot of long-distance phone calls. Her phone bills were huge. Now, Randall always paid for his portion of the bill, but these phone calls would come back and haunt him later on. The only thing that bothered Arden was that Randall brought home a lot of girls. All the time. They were typically young girls, pretty, and seemed to be smitten with Randall. Randall even slept with a teenage babysitter, which made her furious. Even though she didn't really like it, she does remember that he always seemed polite and he doted on these girls before taking them home. Now, even though Randall was attacking these women in disguise and sleeping with random women, he always talked about wanting to meet the girl of his dreams. He wanted to settle down with her and treat her like a queen. The problem was Randall was too aggressive with his dates. He always came on hot and heavy, declaring his love right away and basically smothering these women until they broke it off. To Randall, his point of view was that all these women were the same. They seemed nice in the beginning, and when they got what they wanted, they left. He never once realized that it was him scaring away these women. One time while driving down the freeway, he thought he saw the girl of his dreams. He would pull up his car beside hers and smile, motioning her to pull off the freeway. The girl didn't, but she smiled back because Randall was good looking. Randall would end up following her until she reached her exit and pulled into a Wimpy's burger stand. Randall introduced himself and they exchanged phone numbers. Now, he would call her over Valentine's Day weekend, even at 2:30 in the morning when her stepdad answered, refusing to get his daughter on the phone. Randall kept calling all weekend and asked her if she'd join him at the Marriott Hotel for a Valentine's Day party, but she said no. He also looked her up in the reversed phone book, found her address, and was starting to mail her cards and letters. He was obsessed again. They never ended up dating, but this was Randall, aggressive and determined. That very same Valentine's Day weekend he was hounding the girl from the highway, Randall planned a party at this hotel room at the Marriott. He wrote letters and sent cards to several girls in Oregon inviting them to this party. Most of these girls were young, some still in high school, except for Dixie Palater. She was a good platonic friend of Randall's, and he promised to see her as well that weekend. They didn't end up seeing each other, and as it turns out, nobody had shown up to his party as well. And we'll talk about Dixie again later. Another friend of Randall's named Julie Reitz had told her parents that she had made plans to go to a few different Valentine's Day parties on Saturday night. She was also invited to Randall's party. Julie did in fact attend a few parties Saturday night, but not the one at Randall's. Her friend said that she was in a great mood all night. She went home by herself and hadn't mentioned Randall at all. Sadly, Julie's mother would find Julie's dead, naked body on the stairs of their home Sunday morning. Julie's mom worried that Julie had actually fallen down the stairs or fainted. But when the ambulance arrived, they could see that she did not fall. Instead, Julie had been shot in the back while running down the stairs, probably towards the front door to escape something or someone. Julie's mother said the front door usually was always locked, and Julie would have never let anyone in that she didn't know. So Julie must have known her attacker. There were also wine glasses left out, and it appeared as though Julie was getting ready to make a pot of coffee. But what made her turn around and run away was a mystery. The bullets in Julie's body were a .38 caliber bullets as well, and would be from a Smith & Wesson revolver. The only other thing investigators had to go on was witnesses saying a gold-colored Volkswagen Bug was seen driving up and down the street in front of Julie's home in the early hours of Sunday morning. Randall drove a gold-colored Volkswagen Bug, but police weren't able to connect those dots just yet. Now, just 2 days prior to Valentine's Day in Vancouver, Washington, an elderly clerk was bound with tape and robbed of $60 from her dress shop. A half an hour later in Olympia, Washington, 2 teens were forced to go into a walk-in freezer at a drive-in restaurant where they were sexually assaulted as well. The cash register had also been cleaned out. By 10 p.m., he was in Bellevue, Washington at Dairy Queen, where he robbed the cashier and locked a male employee in the freezer before assaulting the female employee. Police were starting to get angry. They always seemed to be one step behind. Composite photos would be compared and released, all showing similar resemblances down to the tape across his nose. Another fact was that this man had herpes. Many of his victims ended up getting herpes after their attacks, just like Beth, who survived being shot. More victims were coming forward almost daily. employees from 7-Eleven stores in Eugene, Oregon, and a taco time. Then he robbed a small restaurant, assaulting a young employee there who was also the daughter of a police officer. Investigators working on Julie's murder finally got a useful tip. Now remember, Julie was shot running down the stairs. A friend would remember a man named Randall. Julie had met him at Fawcett Tavern when he used to bartend there. He came on too strong and Julie rejected him, and he drove a gold-colored VW Bug. Randall, being the obsessive person that he is, wanted to remain in contact with Julie and would occasionally call her. And Julie was really kind-hearted, so she was still polite to Randall and she just tried to stay friends. Upon further investigation, police learned that Randall was in Eugene Valentine's Day weekend. Then they saw Randall's arrest history: a person who was an exhibitionist, someone who robbed and sexually assaulted his victims. He was also almost a perfect match in description to a lot of these victims. On March 3rd, detectives and Randall's parole officer would go to Randall's home and finally speak with him. He of course said he didn't know Julie until they showed him a photo. He said that he met her, but they were just friends, but he said he did not see her on Valentine's Day weekend. And when asked if he would take a polygraph, he agreed, but then he said that he should contact his attorney and refused to cooperate. His parole officer reminded him that his stipulations on early parole was that he stayed in Portland. He had failed to submit his move to Eugene, Oregon, so they could arrest him right there for breaking his parole. Then they asked him if he would give hair and blood samples to clear his name. He then admitted that he had once had sex with Julie, but he did not kill her. Randall also let detectives search his home. They would take his bed sheets that contained some dried blood and several hair samples, a wallet with a receipt for a .22 caliber handgun, a smoking device, adhesive tape, another bag containing a .38 caliber gun and a cleaning kit, a drug snorter, and a box of firecrackers. Randall had all sorts of excuses as to why he had what he had, but the only thing that made him nervous was the adhesive tape. He asked why the detectives were taking his tape, and he seemed really concerned. Detectives would also speak with Arden Bates, the lady he rented the room from, and they asked her about Valentine's Day weekend, but she wasn't really aware where he was. They asked about long-distance phone calls, and she said yes, he does in fact make many long-distance phone calls. She showed the detectives her last phone bill. They would see that there was many collect calls from cities all down the I-5, including one from Independence, Oregon, the night Beth and Sheri were shot. Things finally clicked, and detectives knew that not only was Randall responsible for Julie's murder, he was also the I-5 bandit. Detectives brought a photo lineup to Beth Wilmot on March 4th, and without hesitation, she pointed to Randal Woodfield. But then she questioned her choice. Beth said the man had a hood over his face when he came into the office building with Sheri, so she couldn't really be 100% sure it was him. They asked if she'd do a real-life lineup, and she agreed. Other women who were attacked by Randall would also point him out of a photo lineup as well. Then on March 8, 1981, Randall was brought into the Salem Police Department and put into a live lineup. He was asked to say, quote, "Where is the back room? Don't call the police. Put the money in the bag. Aren't I big?" End quote. More than 24 victims would take their turns trying to identify their attacker. It would actually be Randall's voice that triggered almost everyone's memories, and some would recognize his eyes as well. Police did go back into Randall's home to do a full search of his house. Unfortunately, his fake beard was never found. A .32 caliber slug was found in his gym bag, and this was a Remington Colt long bullet, which was very rare. It was also the same used on Beth and Sheri, Janet, and Donna. Tape would also be the exact tape used on the victims. The Smith & Wesson that was stolen and used to shoot Julie would be later found in the banks of the Mackenzie River near Eugene, Oregon. It was still in decent shape and proved to be the gun used to murder Julie. Now remember Dixie Powder. She was friends of Randall's from Eugene, and he had met her during the Valentine's Day weekend. Police brought her in to speak because she was one of Randall's only platonic girlfriends, and she also traveled with Randall on occasion as well. Dixie was responsible for purchasing the gun Randall had a receipt for in his wallet. Dixie had also purchased those rare .32 caliber long Colt bullets for Randall. Dixie had admitted that Randall told her about robbing a Baskin-Robbins around Christmas of 1981 near Seattle, and she admitted that he wore a fake beard and a band-aid across his nose during that robbery. During the trial, Randall reverted back to that person who had convinced prison psychiatrists years before that he was a good person. He started to speak about God again and that religion would see him through this, and he vowed to get treatment for his behavior. He felt like he was living a dream and that he was now emerging from it. The real Randall would not take responsibility for the crimes as they were committed by the dream Randall, and he wasn't sure he really did them at all. Randall was only convicted for the murder of Sheri Hall and attempted murder of Beth Wilmot, who testified at the trial. The district attorney at the time was Chris Van Dyke, son of Dick Van Dyke, and he mentioned that Randall was the coldest, most detached defendant he had ever seen. Randal Woodfield was convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. There were other murders that occurred during the time that Randall was committing his crimes, and it said he could be responsible for up to 44 murders, many in towns where he happened to be off the I-5. Randall has never confessed to any of the crimes he was convicted for or accused of. And while he was only convicted of one murder and one attempted murder in connection to Sheri Hall and Beth Wilmot, his DNA has linked him to several others. While incarcerated, Randall has had hundreds of female pen pals, many fiancés, and has married 3 different times and has divorced twice. He is still incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary and continues to flash female guards and employees. There's also this whole other side story where he's linked to Diane Downs, who is also in jail for murdering her kids. I won't get into that today. I will let you research that, or maybe one day I will, but for now, we'll leave it out of Randall's story. My thoughts? I am not sure we will ever truly know why serial killers do what they do, especially someone like Randall who grew up in a seemingly normal home, wasn't abused, didn't have trauma, kind of like Cody Lejakabov that I spoke about a couple weeks ago. Most serial killers, we can find links, we can profile them and make assumptions based on their childhood experiences. Some of the best doctors in the world don't even know. At the end of the day, he committed these crimes because he felt like it. He is a deranged person. What are your thoughts on serial killers and Randal Woodfield? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator. Please hit subscribe to support my channel, and we'll see you again soon.